Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Katharine. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for inviting me here. Today, the keynote is going to be a little bit about suspending your disbelief and joining me on a creative adventure. I want to know, are you ready to turn a little bit off your scientist's brain and turn on your childlike, creative, imaginative, hopeful brain? Who is with me? Who is with me? Okay. If you're not into it, you can leave. There's coffee, there's croissants. I will remain here. So today we're going to think through AI without the possibility for dystopia, otherwise known as imagining a different world, one not inspired by Peter Thiel. So, 6 years ago, I was invited by Vincent, who is here, somewhere. Vincent? No, maybe Vincent is not here. But I was invited by Vincent to Keynote PyData Amsterdam 6 years ago. That was me on the stage at that point in time, talking about ethical machine learning. And at the time, I kind of want to tell you where I was at. I was working in natural language processing. We were just starting to see kind of the things that would lead to the transformers that we see today. And I was extremely concerned. I was worried because research that I was doing and that other people were doing were showing that we had really awful biases in the language models that we were creating. And I was pretty sure that unless people were aware of this and unless we were figuring out ways to combat it, and at this point in time, very much from a scientific perspective, I thought to myself, well, surely this is going to create a bad situation. And so I was invited to Keynote. I gave a talk about how do we think through labeling data? How do we think through biases in word vectors? How do we think through de-biasing models? And at the time, this was kind of the advent of some of that research. And I was extremely convinced at the time that if we had awareness, and if we had technical solutions, and if we also had human-focused solutions, that we would surely fix all of the problems that I was seeing, and I had deep faith in the community at that time. And this is around the time that there was lots of data for good, AI for good, machine learning for good, data for social good. And the more that I got involved in these movements and this work, the more I started to think, if we have data for good, what is the other data? If we have machine learning, ethical machine learning, what is the other machine learning? And I wasn't alone, so we obviously saw the influence of things like Cambridge Analytica. There were things like Taybots that happened. There were things like predpol or the COMPAS algorithm that you might have heard of. And there was ways that we were seeing the biases in the world that maybe we don't want to recreate being expedited, accelerated, and very much widened by the machine learning models, algorithms, and other types of machine learning systems that we were building. Let alone thinking through military drones, computer vision, and what that was being used for at the time. And what I don't know if you know the Are We the Baddies, but I'm American, I live in Germany, I make a lot of inappropriate jokes. Are We the Baddies is a great sketch, if you haven't seen it, where two officers of the Nazi regime ask themselves, are we the baddies? And they conclude that perhaps they are the baddies. And the more I got involved in ethical machine learning, and the more I thought through, okay, do we need just data for good? Do we need to just promote de-biasing models? Do we need to promote ways that we can raise awareness around bias in models? The more I realized that maybe there's a larger system at play. And maybe my perspective, and maybe even lots of research perspective on thinking through just how do we create an ethical algorithm, how do we design a system that doesn't introduce these biases, maybe that wasn't actually the big problems that we were creating with the work that we were doing. And so I don't know if anybody's familiar with Kate Crawford's work, Kate Crawford, and Anatomy of an AI System. I highly recommend taking a look at it. She is also a researcher. She partnered with an artist based in Berlin, and they created a whole map of what an AI system takes. And they went all the way down to what minerals do we extract from the ground to create things like TPUs and accelerated GPUs and so forth, and how does this whole entire supply chain from minerals in the earth in Central Africa all the way to me fine-tuning a model and deploying it via whatever cloud mechanism I want to use, right? All of this is documented in this huge, beautiful diagram. And the question that I have for us today is the problem start when we're at the algorithm stage? Because I'm pretty certain it probably starts before that. And so I wanted to focus in on what she names data exploitation in this graph, where maybe we are the highest knowledge workers. We're still workers, right? Just to remind you, we're still workers. But we're the highest knowledge workers. And then there's the labelers, right? Or maybe there's the people that run companies that help us label. And then there's the people that actually label. And then there's the people that help scrape and collect the data, right? And maybe these are all different groups, and maybe they're all happening in your company in the same place. But there's an entire hierarchy of labor here, essentially, that's happening. And when we look at some of the headlines, of course, of the human feedback for the reinforcement learning that we love to use now, we see that sometimes there's Kenyan workers pay less than $2 per hour, right? And there's workers now organizing in all different parts of the world who are namely in the global south and who are namely paid less than the living wage in order to label the data that we train on. So this issue, obviously, is something that I think affects ethical machine learning, but is not often the focus of those research initiatives. And it goes further. So I work specifically in privacy and machine learning now, so I shifted from ethics to privacy. And I shifted from ethics to privacy, we'll get more on that later. But one of the reasons was I realized that we had a problem with the growth of the model size that we were having. We were also having essentially memorization of some of the training data. This has been proven again and again in research, particularly in sparse areas of your data set. There is going to be some level of replication of the training data. Obviously, from a privacy perspective, that's huge, but it's also a copyright issue. It's an intellectual property issue. It's a question of creative work issue. And I think that what we saw obviously, or what we're seeing with the writer's strike in Los Angeles, where I'm originally from, as well as I can highly recommend reading through papers like This Person Probably Exists. We start to question ourselves, is what we're doing here helping the world and helping people? And if so, how? And finally, I kind of went back to my original roots. So I grew up in Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles is a massive city, and it has a lot of problems. Mainly, our police system is a huge problem. And I grew up in, I'm going to date myself, I was a teenager in the 90s in LA. And if you know anything about the 90s in Los Angeles, this is when Rodney King was beaten nearly to death by the Los Angeles Police Department. And when this happened, I was a teenager, and I saw half the city that I lived in burn because there was riots and there was upset. And I bring this up today because that has kind of been happening in Europe now on and off for the past few years with a variety of different causes. And I know that things are different here, and I appreciate that things are different here. But I do want to point out that sometimes data is used as a form of violence. And in Los Angeles, with the LAPD, it is definitely used as a form of violence. There is a gang database that has babies' names in it. Literally, if you're a baby, how can you be in a gang? I don't really understand. But this is a way that data is collected, usually from communities of color, from Black and Latino activists and organizers, and also, of course, from people that are in gangs. But I will remind you of how LA gangs came to be. So sometimes data in and of itself is violent and can propagate violence. This is Cedric Robinson. I had the chance to work with him on my undergraduate thesis at the University of California in Santa Barbara. And Cedric was a brilliant man. He was the inventor and creator of a movement called Black Marxism and has authored the book. I can recommend it if you haven't had a chance to read it. And what Cedric taught me, growing up as this little white girl in LA, trying to figure out what am I going to do with my life that is meaningful, that is powerful, what working with Cedric taught me is that I can use the power that I have, the voice that I have, the privilege that I have to create something different. I don't have to sit around and be upset at the fact that the LAPD is going to keep doing the LAPD. I'm not going to immediately change the LAPD. I can use the power that I have to build something different, to think through things differently, to look at the problems today and not get mired in depression looking at the problems, but instead think through action that I want to take that changes the world. And when I was at this state of data where I was like, oh no, because honestly I got to a state where I was depressed and I was thinking, can I even work in machine learning anymore? I love this work. I love thinking through important mathematical problems. I like working with people. I like doing cool things with NLP and machine learning. But can I do this work? And I found myself at the same state that I think Cedric found me at, and thought to myself, you know what, Katharine, you can. Because you can take the things that you know and the power that you have and the privilege that you have, and you could do something new with it. And so this talk is a bit inspired by Cedric and as a bit of a tribute to him and the work that the things I was able to learn from him. But it's also a tribute to people in abolitionist movements. It's also a tribute to people in freedom struggles. It's also a tribute to people in post-capitalist movements, in new climate change movements, right? And I think that what I hope for us today is that we can recognize the problems of today, but shift to something that maybe is totally different. So, are you still with me? Are you ready to imagine something different? Okay. And what I'm going to ask you to do, I'll be at the social event tonight. I'm going to show you some of my ideas. If you have an idea, if you come up with something, if you're already working on something, I want you to come find me at the social event. I want to hear your utopia just as much as hopefully maybe you want to hear my utopias. And I want us to think together about creating things, because this is a community, and collectively, obviously, we are much more powerful than any one person's ideas alone. So, my first idea that I would like to share with you is the potential to think through LLMs, or really any multimodal model would also work as well, and to think through these large models, and to think, what if we embrace the fact that they're going to be biased? Because they are, and debiasing hasn't been proven to work in any meaningful way. And what if we embrace that they're biased and we started creating multimodal models or LLMs that allowed people to represent themselves in language that is powerful for themselves? So, who here has heard of the Black Panther Party? Excellent. So, the Black Panther Party was started in the US. Some of the first Black Panther Party members in LA were actually the original founders of the infamous Bloods and Crips in LA. So the Bloods and Crips, the two big gangs that were fighting in the 90s when I was a kid, were the main product of essentially the Black Power movement and communities trying to arm themselves, and then unfortunately turned against each other. We can question how exactly that happened and if there was anybody else involved in them turning against each other. But essentially, the Black Power movement is directly related to the history of gangs in Los Angeles. And I would like to present my plan for the Huey P. Newton neural network, maybe, and to think through how do we create powerful language for communities to speak with language models that represent a powerful place for them as humans. What do you think? So the idea essentially would be to try to put community-based models, to put these in the hands of people where they can feel empowered. And I think here's the first point of the Black Panther Party 10-point program. We want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black and oppressed communities. And I think this can give us a reflection of potentially what about the queer community? What about other communities? What about communities, the Muslim community, and so forth? What about communities that directly, when we interact with language models today, have extreme bias against them? So I'm not sure how many of you know it, but in the original GPT, if you started any prompt with 2 Muslims, it ended in a bomb, pretty much. So there's whole communities that are already harmed by models that we train today that we claim are neutral, which they're not neutral. And we could instead embrace and create ways for communities to create their own multimodal models to represent themselves in language that's powerful, and to also, therefore, for example, have their children, have the community use AI in a way that is empowering rather than in a way that is frightening or disheartening. My main focus now is privacy. And I got involved in privacy by seeing some of the ethical issues that I saw in machine learning at the time, which involved, of course, the overfitting of models and therefore the memorization of some of the training data as we increased model size, but also of the way that people's consent was essentially often not even taken into account. And I thought to myself, if people could consent, whether they're interacting with a language model or interacting with some sort of AI or machine learning model, if people could consent and also say, hey, I want my data used for this and not for that, I thought to myself, people are pretty smart. They're not going to opt in as much to things that hurt themselves, and they're going to hopefully start to try to choose things that make them feel better. So instead of doom scrolling, we would maybe have joy scrolling or something like this. But the first thing that you need to do for that is you need to actually start thinking through, how do we communicate with users about data that they want to give us? How do we communicate with users about what their choices are with their data? And can we give users more options that are also privacy friendly so that their data is not at some point in time used for something that is against their will or their consent? And so here is one example of maybe a more fine-tuned consent model with even options such as keeping data local, federated learning, or also anonymizing data and not sharing other parts of data. So this is all something you can read about in my book. And just to let you know, there will be some free copies of my book today, some available at the PyLadies booth, and some available as part of the pub quiz. So if you would like to get a signed copy today, make sure you either go to the quiz or drop by the PyLadies booth. But I think we can build things where privacy is automatically built in, where it's not a luxury that you pay for, but it's instead a normal way that we interact with our users. And by doing so, we can also start to guide the conversation around what data do we actually need, what data do we use for that, and how do we not mistakenly encode bias by collecting extra personal information. For example, postal code and these types of things often also reflect other types of information, such as income and demographics. There's other things. So I'm assuming here that we have some lovely folks that work like in the ad industry or at Booking.com, optimizing search results and these types of things. You don't have to raise your hand, but if you want to, this is a problem that a lot of us are working on. And I meet brilliant, brilliant people who are playing what I would call ad war games, where you're really trying to fight against the other person. And hey, that's still cool stuff. I'm not trying to say from a technical point of view that's not really cool, and I don't want to affront your work or anything like this. But what I am saying is, what if the problems we were working on were actually the biggest problems that I personally think the world is facing right now? And unfortunately, the biggest problem the world is facing is not what advertisement somebody clicks after they search for something. The biggest problems that we're facing is obviously the climate catastrophe that we're in, is things like housing, right? I had a chat with somebody in Amsterdam this morning. The housing pricing in Amsterdam is just as awful as it is becoming in Berlin. Things like critical infrastructure, so railway systems, other types of critical infrastructure, even obviously creating energy grids that are sustainable for a long term, and things like education. So I know that here is probably just as impacted as in Germany, with not only an influx of a variety of refugees of different ages, all of whom don't speak German. So the school system's in German, they don't speak German. How do we keep up so that the education can reflect and help grow the future of Germany and here the future of the Netherlands, right? Or wherever it is that you may live. And I think that if we were using the most brilliant minds of machine learning and AI and math and physics and all the other things that you've studied in this room to focus exclusively on these problems, we might have a very different picture of how some of these problems work. I've had the joy over the past year of working very closely with let's just say, a famous public transportation company in Germany, which you may have had a chance to be a part of. And I think the impact that I've seen the teams that I've been able to lead there have in just a short time, so 6 months, has been massive because they're understaffed, they're overworked, they often haven't had time to think through things like machine learning models and where it can help them. And even just slight nudges in those directions and putting tools in people's hands can free up their time to actually think and use also their brilliant minds to focus on the problems that they're focused on. How do you build out a transportation grid? How do you move to green energy? How do you get people to places on time? So on and so forth. So I think if we had more government-led AI initiatives and more of government funding and NGO funding for the AI that we're building, that might significantly change the types of things we're building. And I'm pretty sure it will also significantly change the type of research that we decide to invest in. And I think that that could be a fairly cool future. Another thing, another idea, potentially, and it's not super far from the LLMs run by communities, but this one I think is more about getting to a local level or getting to a community-based level, even if that community is distributed. One of the things, I had a lot of time on my hands during Corona. We had fairly significant lockdowns. I know that you had them here as well. And one of the things that I started thinking about is I live in a building, there's about 20 neighbors, and I thought to myself, it would be a cool project if we could get the energy grids from the windows and we could connect them all up. And maybe I could even write an optimization model that's like, oh, I know my neighbor's gonna be gone for a few weeks. I will run her energy to my house, or I'm gonna be gone for the rest of the day. I'm gonna be at the office when it eventually reopened, so I'm gonna run into my downstairs neighbor, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, in Germany, we have a lot of regulations around this. I found out very shortly thereafter. And I'm not allowed to do a lot of my ideas. But I'm working with some people in Germany who know about energy to try to figure out, is there some which way to work through this? But the main idea still holds. The idea that if you have data locally, and you're the machine learning person in the building, you're the machine learning person in a community, is there not a way for you to help create new types of initiatives that are solving some sort of community problem that you're facing, right? In this case, it's rising energy costs in Germany. But in your case, it might be something totally different. And what I want you to think about and what I want you to ponder is, if you weren't doing the stuff you're doing for work, if you had, let's say, 1 or 2 more days free a week, and I'm not asking you to give up your job, I just want you to think with me, what community thing would you want to be involved in? Who would you reach out to? What communities are you already a part of? Where could you get inspiration? Because, again, kind of going back to what we're optimizing for, what we're trying to work on, I think that sometimes we get kind of in tunnel vision of the problems that we're facing. That's totally fine, that's very human and normal. But I think it allows us then, or we fail then to see the creative options that are right around us for different ways that we can work with communities and people to create different types of machine learning. And another thing that I want to mention here is just the community doesn't have to be in your building. It can be a community that you interact with online. It can be a global community. And I think that there are ways, obviously I'm a big fan of federated learning or distributed machine learning, but there are ways for us to think through connecting data even from disparate sets where we can build in privacy, where we can also solve interesting problems. And I challenge you maybe to think through those and how that might change the types of things that we're optimizing for. And finally, I want you to embrace kind of, or try to think about creating a hacker mindset. So who here has a bit of a hacker background or a maker background, something like this, of tinkering with things? That's a lot of, so in my age group, we went to university during the AI winter. We didn't learn anything about machine learning in school because it was believed to be a dead end. Of course, that's not true. We're here today. It's not. That's great. But it means that a lot of people of my age group, we really learned about computers, and we learned also about the things that eventually taught us about machine learning by doing, by playing around with things, by putting in inputs and seeing the outputs, by taking apart machines and putting them back together. And I think that embracing this hacker mindset today, especially around things like machine learning, would be a really cool way to not only teach younger people about machine learning models and how they work, but start to have people question the systems that they're interacting with. And I think it was amazing to me when ChatGPT got released and to see the wide variety of people interacting with it, some in awe, right, of like, this is AGI, and some also, though, in really fun, creative ways. Like, I'm not sure if a lot of you saw, but the people that figured out if you wrote, it doesn't work anymore, but if you wrote one character per line, you could get it to tell you how to build a bomb and how to carjack and these types of things. So creative ways that we can attack and interact with AI systems and demystify some of the ways that they work. And I think that this is a really important part of creating something new, because I think, I know there's a talk later on AI boomers and AI doomers. I think that this is a way to kind of pull apart some of the stuff, the conversations that's happening around AGI. Sure, we can have a conversation about AGI. I've worked in crypto for a long time, just like we can have a conversation about massive scale quantum computers. I think that that research is still important, but I don't think that that's anything that is the pressing issue that I see today. And therefore, I think it's really important that we also have people thinking about the pressing issues that we see today. And that means demystifying machine learning, demystifying large models, demystifying whatever AI is, if it's not machine learning, and starting to give people tools that they can use to attack these models, to think through how they work, to change how they work, and to experiment. And I think that this is a significant factor in trying to build something different and new that is not essentially being, let's say, placated by the AI doomers. So my ask for you today is actually not to reform today. So let me tell you about this sticker. This is a sticker from a group that's called Stop LAPD Spying. And it's a group based in Los Angeles, based in LA Community Action Center that I used to organize in as a young person. That has now, of course, evolved. It's been some years. And Stop LAPD Spying is a group of people that are trying to work on anti-surveillance movements in Los Angeles, where we don't have things like GDPR and we don't have things like privacy rights. And the reason why I want to point out reform is deadly, and maybe it's not deadly here, right? We can talk about massive differences in policing systems and infrastructure, but one of the things I want to point out is that when we get stuck in a mindset where today is the only basis for what we can base tomorrow in, if today is the only way that we can conceive of what will happen in the future, then we are stuck with all of the same problems that we've seen today. And that's part of why Cedric's words inspired me to give this talk today, and why other people that I know in abolitionist struggles, in also anti-prison struggles, and so on and so forth, that the inspiration needs to not come from today. Because if we just get stuck in reforming today, then we kind of are chained to all of the problems that we already have. And I think that this message is really significant, at least it's significant for me, because there are going to be people that continue to be killed based on machine learning systems. And there are going to be people that continue to be harmed by machine learning systems. And if I get focused and focus all of my creative energy and thought on just how do I tinker the knobs so maybe one less person gets killed, one less person gets hurt, one less person is harmed by some sort of output, then I'm destined to kind of continue repeating that cycle. and I can't imagine something different. But what I do want to inspire you to do is to think through something that is your utopia, that's your dream of what would your machine learning work be if it was contributing to something that you think of as significantly important for the world, for your community, for yourself, for people around you. And I want you to actually build and work on that. So here is Dr. Nakeema Damali-Steffebauer. She is a close friend of mine and also the forward author for my book. She has studied Arabic studies and traveled the entire Middle East and so forth, and eventually landed in Berlin. And she works in Berlin, also in data and machine learning background, and leading large technology at a very large German company. But what she does in her free time is totally different. First and foremost, she's an angel investor in a variety of initiatives, often led by people in the Global South, startups and different ideas facing Global South issues. And she also started a group called Frauenloop. That's actually how we met. I got involved in Frauenloop, and I helped run the first machine learning group at Frauenloop. And Frauenloop is a group of women who have immigrated to Germany, who are looking to enter the software, data, or machine learning world. They often have the same backgrounds as a lot of us, but often less access to the programs that we might have had. So I worked with a lot of people in bioinformatics who were physics PhDs, so on and so forth. And I taught them the basics of machine learning so that they could get their foot in the door of these jobs. And working with immigrant women, mainly women of color, in Germany, and the problems and the challenges they face in entering the career market, even in a fairly diverse place like Berlin, is fairly significant. And I think that one of the things that Nakeema noticed and what she wanted to do in creating Frauenloop is to say, what is the one thing that I think that would change the problems that I see in the world today? And something obviously that you can have some minor influence on is maybe a good idea. So what Nakeema did is create Frauenloop. I'm very grateful that she did. I got to know her, and I got to know a bunch of other amazing people. And I want you to use Nakeema's story potentially as inspiration for your own, of what is the one thing that you can do? You will have a long career. You will make plenty of money. What is the one thing that you can do that will maybe change machine learning, change AI, change data, change your community in a way that you would like to see? And instead of saying, oh, that's not possible, or oh, it's stuck in this, or oh, I can't do it because of that, I want you to still keep suspending your disbelief. And I want you to create a path, create a vision that has nothing to do with the problems that you see today, other than it will directly work against them in some which way, shape, or form. Nakeema has significantly inspired me and my work, and I think it hopefully for you also shows a path forward where machine learning can be a hopeful place, where it can be an inspiring place, where we can help empower people and really actually change lives and shift to a new way where it's very happy to get on stage and to not talk about dystopias, but instead to talk about things that are going to be a future that we can all believe in, and to move away from the idea of being mired in problems and towards a community that is actively creating futures. I think one thing I want to leave here with is the people in this room are extremely powerful, whether you believe it or not. You understand things that a lot of people in the world are talking about and they have no understanding of. You have power you program things. You program the models that will end up deciding what people see on the internet, deciding what they think about what's available for them, deciding maybe even sometimes how they see themselves. That is extremely powerful. And I want you to understand, to harness that power, and I want you to use it for something that you believe in, building the future that you would like to see. If you're motivated, I have some ideas for you. I'm gonna share them. I'm gonna share notes. There's some cool workbooks you can work through. There's, of course, numerous of the things that I've talked about today. And one thing that I would encourage people to do in this room, especially if you have a European passport and you can vote and you can engage in political parties and organizing, I encourage you to do so. There are lots of us that can't vote here. There are lots of us that are here just, trying to live and find a better life. And I hope that you use the power that you have to help create the utopia that you would like to see. I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today. If you have questions, ideas, you want to challenge, say, Katharine, you're wrong, here's why. Or you want to share utopia ideas, you're very welcome to reach out. I also have a newsletter called Probably Private, where I write more on the technical side, but sometimes these types of ideas as well. And you can reach out to me there. I also have a P.O. box. So if you want to send me untraceable packages, you can send it to my P.O. box. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm really excited to hear your utopias, and I hope maybe I've inspired a few conversations today. If one of you in this room decides to build a utopia based on this, then I have done my work here, and I thank you for your attention.